Now, the Brandon Chamber of Commerce and Sill & Company present the 1999 Provincial Leaders Forum, live from the UCT Pavilion at the Keystone Centre. The moderator for this evening's forum is Brandon Chamber of Commerce past president Reg Helwer. Panelists include Mayor Serfati from Brandon University, Lori Dangerfield from Brandon Chamber of Commerce, Peter Dalla from Brandon Sun. This live commercial-free broadcast is made possible through the generous support of Sill & Company Chartered Accountants.
Pavilion in Brandon, and we are on CKX television as well. We are sponsored here by the Brandon Chamber of Commerce, the Brandon Sun, CKX television, Sill & Company, the Keystone Centre, and Ben Mark Sound have also helped us. My name is Reg Helwer, and I will be the moderator for this evening. We have with us this evening Mr. Gary Dewar, the leader of the NDP, Mr. Gary Filmon, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives, and Dr. Gerard, leader of the Liberals. We will be having opening remarks from each of the leaders in a pre-selected order. They will be having 4 minutes for opening remarks. We will then go to 3 sections of questions from our panel. Our panel this evening is Dr. Mayor Serfati of Brandon University, Lori Dangerfield, president of the Brandon Chamber of Commerce, and Peter Della Vincenza, editorial page and assignment editor of the Brandon Sun. We will now go to opening remarks, and Mr. Filmon.
Thank you very much, Reg, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back in Brandon, where Janice and I spent 2 very happy years of our lives in the late 60s living here, and I thank the Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to be able to talk about our plans for the future. In deciding which party to support, I ask you to consider and compare our teams, our track records, and our plans for the future. Our team combines the experience of a Jim McRae or a Len Derkach with the freshness and vigor of new faces like Marty Snelling and Maxine Plashuk. Our team is made up of people with diverse backgrounds, including teachers, nurses, farmers, and business people. Our track record is clear. In 1995, I asked for a mandate to balance the budget and begin paying down our debt. Although the NDP fought balanced budgets every step of the way, we managed to deliver 5 straight balanced budgets and pass the toughest balanced budget and taxpayer protection laws in North America. We also set out a 30-year plan to eliminate Manitoba's debt. This plan is on track so that our debt will be gone by the time today's kindergarten students reach the early years of their careers. This long-term approach to planning served us well in the past and will serve us well in the future. I think everyone here today would agree that Brandon has taken huge steps forward over the last decade. This didn't happen by accident. Brandon created partnerships and set goals, and with each passing day, this community is benefiting because of it. One of our most important challenges is to attract and keep our young people here at home in Manitoba. You can't meet this challenge by slinging mud at your opponents and then hoping for the best. You need a positive plan for the future. In this election, we've set out our 5-year 50-50 plan to cut taxes and protect priority spending on health and education. Some people say, how can we afford to cut taxes? I say, how can we afford not to? Our neighbors are aggressively cutting taxes, and if we're to remain an attractive place for our young people, we have to cut taxes, especially income taxes and property taxes. Our overall approach is based on 3 priorities. The first is to create jobs and opportunities for our young people, particularly the knowledge-based jobs of the new economy. The second priority is to provide Manitobans with the skills and training they need to fill those jobs. Early in this campaign, we announced our 7-point education plan to address that challenge. Our third priority is to make sure Manitoba isn't just a good place to work, but it's a great place to live. And that means safe communities and quality health care. We've set out our plans in both of these areas. We know there's more to be done in health care. Our challenges won't all be solved immediately, but they won't be solved at all if we fail to keep our economy growing to generate the revenues needed for health care. The lack of attention to jobs and taxes by the other parties suggests that they're taking our success for granted. This is wrong, and it's dangerous as well. We must continue to plan for and adapt to changing circumstances, and we must be prepared to act decisively when people are in need. And that's why my cabinet and I met right here in Brandon with the Rural Recovery Coalition before making our $50 an acre unceded acreage commitment. We know how important agriculture is to our entire province, and we'll continue to support our farmers. Diversification is one of the keys to success of our economy. Because of our willingness to change the rules on hog marketing and because of the hard work and foresight of Brandon's leaders, Maple Leaf decided to set up here in Brandon. We took some heat, especially from the New Democrats, when we changed these rules, but it was worth it. Maple Leaf is a symbol of Brandon's can-do attitude and a great example of how we can do anything from right here in Manitoba. Brandon and the West Van region have a great future ahead, and with the right leadership team and plan, we have every reason to believe that our hopes and dreams for this city and region will become a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pillman. Next up, we have Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and all the other sponsors for the opportunity to have this debate tonight. It's great to be at the Keystone Centre again. Great hockey games have been played here. Great winter fairs are attended by all of us. And of course, just over 15 months ago, there was a very, very important public meeting in this area to deal with health care in Manitoba, a meeting held and sponsored by Len Evans to deal with the conflict and crisis in health care. And I want to thank the people in this room and the people across this area for coming together to speak out on behalf of health care at that public forum. Because at that public forum, we had the government hear the people and finally change their mind on the conflict they had with doctors and finally go to binding arbitration that was proposed by the people in this community and proposed in the legislature for weeks without success to the Premier. I want to say there's going to be lots of statistics and numbers flying around tonight. I might use a few myself, but it is important to think about some of the symbols going into this next election campaign. We have frozen food now in Winnipeg being proposed in a secret report to come to Brandon. We're going to say no to the hospital frozen food going to Brandon and say yes to an MRI machine coming to this community after the next election in government. We think it's important to keep our specialists in this community, to attract new specialists, to have that kind of leadership and resolve and follow through on commitments we're going to make. We've kept our promises in this election to 5 commitments. We don't have a billion-dollar set of promises. We have 5 commitments we're going to keep. We're going to deal with the crisis in health care. We're going to give our young people hope and opportunity through education and training. We're going to keep hydro owned by the public for the benefit of the public. We're going to work in a cooperative way with this community and business and labor and government to create new jobs in the future. We're going to have safe communities, and we're going to keep the balanced budget legislation but lower the property taxes that has gone up unconscionably in the last number of years, particularly with the increases in school taxes, some 25% in the last 2 years in this community. We will work in an all-party way, as we have said before in Melita, on the agricultural crisis. I was proud to meet with producers. I was proud to meet and work with the government of the day. We believe that crisis should be dealt with in a non-political way. And I want to say to the people of the Southwest Manitoba that they deserve the same treatment in the crisis today, in terms of the producers today in Southwest Manitoba, as the producers in the Red River Valley in 1997. Anything short of that is absolutely unacceptable. I thought it was passing strange that at the same time the federal government would not visit Southwest Manitoba to deal with this crisis, they had emergency meetings dealing with tax concessions for NHL hockey players. We say the family farm should come before hockey players here in Southwest Manitoba from the federal government. We've proposed ideas on tourism for this area. More marketing for tourism could take tremendous advantage of the natural assets in this community. We want to work cooperatively with the people. We have straight shooting candidates that are fair-minded and hard-working. Scott Smith and Drew Caldwell, they're straight, honest people. We believe a government should have honest people running and honest people working for it, and that's our future for Manitoba. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Now, Dr. Gerard.
Good evening. It's good to be with you in Brandon. I'd like to share with you a little bit of my dream for a better Manitoba. And it starts with a dream for a better health care system. Brandon has an excellent hospital, the Brandon General Hospital, that I've visited on quite a number of occasions. And I know that over the last little while, things have been hampered by a health care system which has been undermined by the present provincial government. Liberals will put in place elected boards for the regional health authorities, boards responsible to the people and not to the politicians. We'll appoint a Manitoba ombudsman to deal specifically with health concerns. We'll treat healthcare professionals with respect. It's time we improve the morale among healthcare professionals. We recognize that health needs for seniors need to be improved with better and more support at home so that people don't have to spend as much time in institutions. We need political leadership that will take responsibility. And for the first year of a Liberal mandate, I will be Health Minister as well as Premier to get our healthcare system back on track. I have a dream that my children, my children's children, will have the same educational opportunities that I have had. Liberals will invest in Manitoba schools. We will double the provincial funding for textbooks and for technology so that teachers have the tools to support good learning in our classrooms. We will invest $10 million into access for post-secondary education, including bursary programs for students who have the ability and the demonstrated capability but may not have the economic means. And we'll provide support to the universities and post-secondary education institutions like the University of Brandon and Assiniboine Community Colleges so these institutions are ready for the 21st century. When I was the Federal Secretary of State for Science and Technology, I had a dream that Manitoba could be a leader in the new technology. Let us go beyond call centers. I saw how Manitoba could take our traditional strengths, like agriculture, natural resources, and integrate that into the new global technology. Let's put technology in centers around all of Manitoba, including Brandon, Dauphin, Deloraine, Melita, Minnedosa, and many others. Young people in Manitoba are leaving because they don't have the opportunities and they don't have the possibility for high-paying, high-tech jobs. Let's have a balanced economy with a high-tech component. Let's have the opportunities for young people. And we need to help our farmers. It's time to have a government which can cooperate and work well with the federal government so we have cost sharing for the contributions to unseeded acres, so that we can free up provincial dollars to help cover the chemicals and the fertilizer inputs which were washed away in the wet weather and the flooding this spring, and to help young farmers who are having difficulty. It's time to undertake some serious watershed management, irrigation and drainage in southwestern Manitoba. And it's time to have an urgent agricultural summit, as we're calling for, to deal with the commodity cash crisis which faces Manitoba farmers because of the low prices. It's time to provide help to businesses in communities like Melita and Minnedosa that are hurting at the moment because of the farming disaster. Brandon is an exciting city. I want to work with you, as we're working in Winnipeg, with a City Plan 2000, to have a plan to develop a vibrant future for this city, a future that will build on the exciting things that are happening at the moment and give us a wonderful place to live and a wonderful future in this community. We also need to make sure environmental issues are taken seriously, that guidelines are followed, so that rivers like the Assiniboine we can swim in them and use them as playgrounds. We need, and I'm here to advocate, for the Liberal tradition in Manitoba. Manitoba Liberals are in the extreme center because that's where we believe Manitobans want to be. We're the party that represents the center.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. We now move to the questions from our panel, and after the question is asked, the leaders will have an opportunity to respond for 1.5 minutes to each question. After the panel is finished asking their questions, each of the leaders will then have 3 minutes to rebut anything that was said by one of the other leaders. Our first question is from Laurie Dangerfield.
Good evening, gentlemen. The Brandon Regional Health Centre services an area encompassing southwestern Manitoba and parts of eastern Saskatchewan and addresses the health care needs of 180,000 Manitoba citizens. How does your party envision the role of Brandon Regional Health Centre as a regional centre? And what will you do to ensure that our hospital is positioned for provision of comprehensive care?
Dr. Gerard.
Yeah, I strongly believe, and I've said this on numerous occasions, that Brandon should be a regional health center. I visited communities around Brandon, and the message is that they are in trouble if the health center in Brandon as a regional center is not doing well. We need the specialist physicians, we need the capabilities here in Brandon to provide very high quality health care. We also need strong links to the regional authority areas that are covered, Southeast Man and Marquette, the areas around Brandon, because in fact a regional center must function as a support center to the nearby regions. So I see, and I have advocated for, the development of a series of specialist centers in Manitoba, centers that will be very important not only in providing care, but in fact in training physicians and other healthcare professionals, so we have good healthcare professional support all over rural Manitoba, as well in the city of Winnipeg.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Dewar?
Thank you. Well, Brandon will be a major hospital under an NDP government, and we will follow through on the capital requirements and the vision for it to be a strong regional hospital in a strong healthcare system. We've had promises of capital development in Brandon in 92, in 93, in 94, in the election in 95, with the $600 million promise that was made and broken in 97, in 98, and 99 again. Broken promises can't go on any longer. We have to follow through on the capital construction, and we will. We have to go from ATCO trailers to a strong lab, strong regional lab in this region. The government is tinkering around with a proposal to centralize all the labs. We don't believe that makes any sense, and we will act accordingly. We have to proceed with the diagnostic capital. It isn't part of the next stage in capital here in Brandon, and look at MRI machines being located in this community, not only to allow people to stay here to get those tests, but more importantly, to allow us to recruit and retain the specialists that are so important to go along with the capital investments that are needed. Broken promise after broken promise must end, and a strong commitment to this hospital and this regional capital plan must go forward after the next election. I promise to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Philman.
You know, after decades of talking about it, Brandon is finally becoming a regional health center under our government. And the reason it is, firstly, is because we have regional health authorities in place to be able to do the planning and to be able to look at the big picture and to centralize activities here. I remember when we took office that you couldn't even get CAT scans and you couldn't get dialysis here in Brandon. We finally brought those in. But in recent times, ultrasound, mammograms, new CT scanner, new fluoro machine, a bone densitometer, gamma camera, all of these things have been coming here and soon to be installed next year, of course, the MRI machine. This is making it a regional center. We're treating it as a regional center. We're bringing in referrals here and bringing, once again, having people who are specialists practice here. And this is something that Brandon has looked forward to for a long, long time. I could talk about the promises that were made under the New Democrats in two times that they were in government in the 70s and 80s, but I won't even go there because people in Brandon know that now the things that should be done to make this a regional health center are being done and will continue to be done with the plans that are laid out for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Our second question is from Mr. Della Vincenza.
You've all mentioned recruitment and retention of healthcare professionals. What specifically will you do to keep them in the region? Because that's one of the biggest issues facing this area.
Well, there's a number. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Philman is first on this response.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, we've put in our plan for the future of healthcare adequate funding to ensure that we can attract and retain professionals. We've just entered into a new agreement with the MMA that puts substantially increased funds in place for people. We've also addressed specific needs in critical areas, and in recent discussions with the RHA, I'm familiar with the fact that now we have gone from a point where it was getting very, very critical. There are not only people in place at the GP level, but you've got now 3 pediatricians, soon to be 4. You've got an ophthalmologist here. You've got people who are here in other specialty areas that you couldn't recruit and retain in the past, because we've put the emphasis on the right areas, because we've made it a priority, and because the Regional Health Authority has finally been able to recruit for the area as a regional hospital. It's now all come together, and that's I think proof that it's working, and we'll just carry on meeting the needs that are here.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Dr. Gerard?
Well, the facts basically are that for many years of both NDP and Conservative governments, we've had problems getting rural physicians and, in fact, other rural healthcare workers throughout the province. This is a problem in terms of leadership throughout that period. It is a problem in putting in place programs so that we have the training here in Manitoba which is effective. We can't rely forever on bringing in people from South Africa. I participated a number of years ago in a program in Minnesota which was very effective in bringing in people and medical students so that they trained. We can do that sort of program here, but it means a change in the way that we do things, and it means that we must have a major commitment, not a kind of an on and off commitment as the Philman government has had to the training facilities in Dauphin, for example, for family practice trainees.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Our third question is from Dr. Serfati.
Thank you. We get...
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think...
You're anxious, and I apologize.
It's okay. Bill Norrie did that to the Gary last week, so...
The crowd obviously knows better what's happening than the moderator. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you. There's just a recent outside review of the cardiovascular, by a cardiovascular team recently in this community that raised serious alarms about the situation here and the viability past the next year for these programs if the infrastructure and nursing shortage isn't dealt with. We certainly support a systematic approach to doctor recruitment, including the Saskatchewan method of recruiting doctors. We support the continuing educational and the practical programs at the Dauphin Hospital for medical residents. We support telemedicine that can allow doctors to work in communities, in this community, and stay in touch with the teaching hospitals. We support the idea that the public, through the government, must have a responsibility to resource the recruitment and retention of doctors. It can't only allow it to be with the MMA. And we also want to ensure that the diagnostic centers and the other needed capital programs for this hospital will allow us to recruit and retain the specialists that are so very important for this region. I also believe that nursing is a huge shortage, and we must have a strategy to deal with nursing. I hope it comes up in the next question, but it's certainly a shortage that will affect the level of medical care in this community.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Now we get to the third question. Dr. Serfati.
No such luck, Mr. Dewar. I'm going to turn to another area.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we only have one question on this very important area to all three parties, and that is the area of education. So by definition, the question is going to be general in the sense that it includes K-12 and post-secondary education institutions as well, but it's very specific in that I would like you please to address the issue in relation, if possible, to southwestern Manitoba and Brandon. My question is, what, in your opinion, are 3 or 4 of the most important challenges facing education in this area and perhaps in Manitoba? And most important, what specific plan do you have to ensure that you will bring in educational policies that are going to enhance our educational institutions, which many people feel are ailing today in some respects?
Well, I would say the first challenge we have is hope for our young people in high schools for post-secondary education. I was in a high school in Brandon last year, and a group of grade 11 history students, student after student after student, said, we're studying hard, but we will never be able to afford to go to university. We think that hope is important in high school. We should be the most optimistic where we're in high school. And we want to make universities more affordable. We've suggested a signal in that regard with the 10% tuition fee for the next year. And we think that's very important. We also believe that businesses need skilled workers, and young people want to be skilled. The report of the Assiniboine Community College says a 20% increase in the operational grants to that community college will result in a 50% enrollment. So we see also the connection between the economy and a global economy. We want to see trained and skilled young people, and we see the opportunities to do that with our community college promise. We also believe we have to invest in public schools. A 25% increase in the property tax here and the number of doors that are being proposed to be closed to young people is unacceptable. And if it's a choice between $1 billion in tax reductions or giving a little bit of those resources to our kids and therefore to our future, we think that's the third priority, and that's why it's part of our commitment in this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Philman.
With respect to our public school system, we have to continue to invest in our public school system. We have to ensure that we're continuing to improve the curriculum and modernize it. We have to set high standards and have the courage to test to make sure that we're meeting those standards. We have to ensure that we're investing in the technology in the classrooms and making sure that our children are conversant not only with the basics but with the new basics, which is technology. At the post-secondary level, we have to continue to make it affordable for our young people. We have the third lowest tuition rates of all the provinces in Canada at the university level, the second lowest in community college, but we have to continue to do things like the matching bursary and scholarship initiative that we brought in that brings another $10 million available to students, and the Millennium Scholarships that we've entered into agreement with the federal government that brings another $10 million of scholarships a year for our young people. We have to continue to be focused on making that affordable for them at the post-secondary level, and then of course making sure that they can afford to stay here in the future by virtue of the fact that we keep their taxes down so that they can stake their future here and pursue their careers here.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Dr. Gerard.
Yeah, I think that there are four major areas. One, it's fundamentally important to support our teachers and to give them the tools so they can do the job. So we would double the investment in textbooks and provide additional support for special needs children so our teachers feel supported. Second, there's a revolution in education with technology. And as the federal minister responsible, I saw some extraordinary things happening coast to coast. But we need to give kids the technology, the network, so they can learn from one another and teachers from one another and really provide a very dynamic, future-thinking learning environment. We can do it here, but it takes some vision. When it comes to post-secondary education, there's an issue of access. Too many of us have to, for our children, almost mortgage their future in order to get access to post-secondary education. And it's time to set out and make sure that young people have access. And we propose the increase in bursaries and cooperative education support and in support for distance learning so that people can learn at their own time and their own place when they're working part-time or in other circumstances. And lastly, it's important to support our institutions, because unless our institutions are strong and well supported, then the rest at the post-secondary level doesn't work. So let's make sure we're working hard and strongly for education.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. We now have a section where the leaders can rebut each other's comments, and they have 3 minutes each of which to do so. Please remember that this section is on the health and education. Dr. Gerard, you're first.
Well, I think that a leader who is seeking re-election should look at his own record. And I remember 1995 election, and health care was a very important item, and Mr. Philman was out there leading the charge and say he was going to make sure that we had a strong health care system. And over the last number of years, over the last term of office, we've had a deterioration. We've had Gary Philman, who has run the health care system and invested and called for new investments at the time of election and then starved it between. You know, they used to say that politicians of the old stripe invested in highways at the time of election and then nothing in between. Well, Mr. Feldman has turned that to a system for investing in health care, and so we've got all sorts of health care facilities going up, and it's not a very productive way to manage the system. And what's happening in places like Deloraine, for example, is that something that would have been reasonable cost because of all the expansion and building going on is coming in a new clinic facility, $750,000 over budget. We need, as we propose, to bring in a health facilities management board, and we need to do this responsibly, not just at the time of election. It's time to plan not only in healthcare and do it well, but to be future thinking for education, and to build not only the necessary traditional types of support for education at all levels, but to be future thinking in building those information highway, digital economy type of networks that can provide education and healthcare at an advanced level in all communities in Manitoba. I was talking earlier today about the potential in having links so that specialists in, for example, Brandon could be supporting very well by video links general practitioners and nurses who are working in smaller communities. We can do things a lot better. We can do things in healthcare and education cost effectively. That's where we have to go in this province.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you very much. In the '95 election, for the fourth time, people in this region were promised capital investment as part of the $600 million capital fund for this regional hospital. It was promised again in '96 and '97 and again in '99. That is too many promises that have been broken. I had the opportunity of visiting that hospital last year, just last spring, and met with nurses who told me over and over and over again about the shortage of nurses after the government fired 1,000 nurses, talked about the pressure and stress on the front lines of health care, and the Feldman government has created 10 vice presidents in a second regional board in Winnipeg. Something is wrong with this movie when a government can spend $750,000 out of the health community budget for advertising before an election of your money, and we can't have enough nurses on the front line of health care. We have to do something about it. There was frost 3 inches thick on the windows in a hospital room. Today at Nipawa, they're fixing the roof. We raised this in the legislature. The roof has been leaking. The birthing room has been leaking for the last number of years. It rained so much this weekend that the roof started crumbling. That's the neglect of the Feldman government. We don't need a government that's going to come before the people and promise to fix health care in an election campaign. We need a team of men and women that are committed to fixing health care after the election and right through for the next 4 years. And that's what we're going to do. We also have to deal with the challenges in education with those young people in grade 11. We want our universities and community colleges to be there for kids in our community. We don't want a situation where some kids believe they can't go to university because they can't afford it. Their family can't afford it. We've got to give our kids hope. Now, I can't turn back the whole 200% tuition fee increase overnight or all the cuts in community colleges that have been increased a little bit this year. But I know that hope for young people, skills, training, education, opportunity is good for our education system, and it is crucial in a changing global economy that we have our young people skilled and ready to go. Let's give them the chance. Let's do it through good education here in Manitoba. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Feldman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We all know that there's more that needs to be done in health care. There are no easy solutions. Otherwise, governments right across Canada wouldn't be grappling with the challenges that they're faced. We have a plan in place, a plan that is investing considerable money. We spent $2.1 billion this year on the healthcare system. That's an increase of $300 million a year over the last 2 years. It's a plan and a budget amount that Mr. Dewar and his party voted for in the recent budget in the legislature, because they know that it's a plan that is designed to solve the problems that are being faced in healthcare. It will reduce waiting lists. It'll relieve hospital overcrowding. It'll recruit and retain doctors and nurses, and it will build over 850 more personal care beds to free up space in our hospitals to ensure that those acute care institutions can do their job. All of those things are part of the plan, and most of them are underway right now, and the money is allocated for it. And to suggest that you can solve all of the problems in healthcare, a $2.1 billion budget, by adding $15 million is something that is just not believable. And that's exactly the proposal that's been put forward by Mr. Dewar and his party. It's hard to accept that that could possibly be the plan for the future. That's as much as we spend in a long weekend, and they say it's going to solve all our problems. You judge whether or not that's credible. And when it comes to the comments of Dr. Gerard saying that we have problems in meeting the tests and the needs of healthcare, I asked him how he thought it would help Manitoba when he sat at the federal cabinet table and he cut $250 million a year in transfer payments to Manitoba for health and education. And then he had the nerve to say that that's not a problem. Money isn't a problem, it's the management of the system. Well, you go and tell the doctors and the nurses, Dr. Gerard, that $250 million a year that you cut from healthcare isn't affecting their ability to provide quality healthcare. I'll tell you, not one of them will agree with you. And I just want to say that Mr. Dewar and his party are fond of putting up targets that aren't true, misleading bits of information. And he goes on to say that somehow that the Westman Lab is not going to be carried on in the way of the changes that are being made. Well, I can tell him that I met with the CEO of the Brandon Regional Health Authority just today, who's part of the process that is examining the labs, and there is no such proposal anywhere under consideration. In fact, the Brandon lab is intended to be the lab that will service the needs of all the rural areas of Manitoba outside of Winnipeg. And so, rather than put up those kinds of proposals to get people upset, I suggest you come up with a positive plan for the future. If not, just say that you support us like you did in the legislature when you voted for our budget.
All right, thank you, Mr. Philman. We are now leaving the health and education section. I'd like to remind the leaders that there is water under the podiums for some refreshment. And for the ladies and gentlemen in the audience, we have coffee at the back, compliments of the Chamber of Commerce and the Brandon Sun. For you at home, you can help yourselves. Next, we move on to the economy section. And the first question we have is from Dr. Servati.
Thank you. Some years ago, Mr. Philman, your party passed balanced budget legislation in the province. As you mentioned earlier, both parties appear to support balanced budget legislation today. One of the conditions of balanced budget legislation clearly is that you have to spend within your means. That is to say that you can only spend what you have, the revenues that you have received. And in a way, one could say that election promises of all sorts to all parties should go out the window now, because we can't promise anything unless it is clearly conditional on having the money. Now, my question is very important, because it has to do with the future. In the event of a revenue shortfall in the province of Manitoba over the next 4 years, what would be the spending priorities of your respective governments under your leadership? In other words, what would be the first thing that your government would do if there was 100 million, if there was 200 million, or if there was only 50 million of revenue over expenditures? What would be the priorities that you would set for your government in clear, specific terms, please?
Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you. We have been very careful to work off of the existing budget of a $400 million projected surplus over the next 4 years, which was introduced in the legislature this last spring, rather than operating off of the $1 billion number to produce the tax reductions, income tax reductions, as proposed by the Conservatives. We think that you can make some commitments on tax reductions up to about 18 months from now, but the scenario that you indicate, if it happens in 30 months from now, you're either going to break an election promise or have to cut vital services or have to sell a Crown Corporation. If we are elected, we will amend the Crown Corporation Act to prohibit the sale of a Crown Corporation going into the operating revenues of the government, as we had proposed before the unfortunate or undemocratic sale of the telephone system. And we believe that with our numbers, the modest $400 million numbers, that the first difference between ourselves in terms of priorities will be that we would not proceed with income tax cuts to the degree that the government's talking about, because we will keep those funds available for health and education. In other words, we believe that we've built into our projections, in our 5 commitments, the absolute necessity of health care and education, number 1 and 2, modest achievable property tax reductions, number 3, and we're not going to gamble
away Mr. Doer.
With income tax. Thank you.
Our next response is from Mr. Philman.
Our highest priorities for the next 5 years for spending are health and education. They take half of the money that we are projecting will be available to us. The $500 million over the next 5 years will go to health and education. But I suspect that what you're getting at is you don't believe the numbers. And I'll give you just a couple of ways in which to look at it. All we're projecting is that the economy will grow over the next 5 years by $850 million. That's a quarter less than it grew over the last 5 years. But if you take the worst 5 years that you can reckon in the last little while, you can take the period from 1990 to 1995, and our own source revenues grew by $660 million. So with the amount of money, $250 million that we currently have in the Fiscal Stabilization Fund, we could still meet our 50-50 plan target in both the spending and the tax reductions over that period of time, even in the worst 5-year period. That was the second worst recession this century in Canada. Only the dirty 30s were worse in that period between 1990 and 1995. We would have still met our targets that we've set out for the 5 years. What you need is a plan, and you need a commitment as to how you're going to achieve that plan. You don't want to surprise people 1 year at a time with a promise here and a promise there and a little bit for this one and a little bit for that one. You have to tell them what your priorities are for the long term, and that's exactly what we've done with our 50-50 plan.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Dr. Gerard.
You know, pulling a billion-dollar plan out of thin air 4 months after you've put down the budget is not all that credible. And I would suggest to Mr. Philman that it's a bit of a gamble. In fact, it's more like the 50-50 draw gamble. You know, it earns some money, but you know, it's a gamble whether you're going to win or lose. And I think, Mr. Philman, you've probably been building too many casinos. The problem the problem is this. I've been out in the farm fields. I've talked with farmers. I know what the commodity prices are. I know how difficult it is to make a living out there right now because of the way things are, with low prices for grains and wheat and canola and so on. And I've seen what's happened over the many years in the prairie economy. And we have ups and downs, and I think now is a time for prudent planning. And so we have been very cautious in the projections that we've made in the plans for property tax cuts, but not in other areas. And for spending, we are being cautious as well. We would take the 18 departments of the provincial government and decrease those to 14. So we will run things in an efficient way. We will plan and invest so that we move to a better planning and a better fiscal environment. And I think we're going to be able to maintain priorities in areas like healthcare and education, which are very, very important.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Our second question on the economy is from President Dangerfield.
Tax reduction has been consistently identified by the membership of the Brandon Chamber of Commerce as a crucial factor to Brandon businesses' ability to create jobs and wealth, to retain skilled and professional labor, and to compete on a national and international level. What is your party's plan, specifically in regard to taxation, to ensure Brandon businesses exist in a business environment in which it can succeed?
Thank you. Dr. Gerard?
Yeah, our plans for reduction of tax are to start with the property tax, and we would take the provincial education levy off the property tax over a period of 3 years so it's fiscally affordable and done in a responsible fashion. That would decrease property taxes by between 10 and 15%, depending on where you are in the province, and I think would be an important step in reducing property tax rates throughout Manitoba. We would follow through on the commitments in the last budget in terms of some modest reduction in income tax and in other taxes for small business. But at this point, we're not going to go further because we believe that a prudent approach is appropriate. But as we can do it in an affordable way, in a responsible way, we would move further to reduce taxes over the course of time.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you. I think there's no question that all Manitobans want decent health care, decent education as part of their services, and reduced taxes. And we have said that we can make some achievable tax reductions over the next 18 months. They are modest but achievable. We had proposed that the small business tax be reduced from 9% to 5%. Taking into consideration the Canadian Federation of Independent Business report on government subsidies to business, suggesting that those be scaled down and the tax for all businesses, small businesses, go down. We support that. We had it in our alternative budget in 98, which I communicated to the Chamber, and the government's brought it in this budget. We think it's a good idea. We'll honor it. We're going to support the 1.5% reduction in income tax scheduled for January 1st, 2000. And further, we're going to reinstate the property tax credit in the next property tax year, some 6 months from now, of $75 per householder to be the first step in reduced property taxes. We'll follow that with another $75 next year, and following that, we're prepared to phase out the education support levy, subject to the conditions of health and education, pursuant to the first question raised of what are your priorities. 18 months down the road, if we still have good revenues, we'll continue to reduce achievable tax reductions, but we're not going to gamble away our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Philman.
Well, Laurie, you're absolutely right. People who want to invest here, people who want to stake their future here, want to know that at the end of the day, they're going to have some money left over for the things that they want to do for their families and for their own future. And that's why it's important for us to lower taxes, to be competitive with all the jurisdictions around us. And that's why we did, in this budget, pass the reduction of small business tax rate from 9 to 5. We weren't just thinking about it or proposing it like Mr. Dewar. We passed it. We act on it. That's why we're committed to cutting our personal income tax rates by 21%. As part of our 50-50 plan. That's why there's going to be tax relief for stay-at-home parents, so that two parents don't have to make a decision that both of them have to work because of the discrimination in the income tax system that the federal government places on us. We're going to make sure that they have a choice and that one can stay home and still get a tax break. That's why we're going to remove the education support levy on the property tax, which will have twice the benefit of the break that Mr. Dewar and his party want to give to all property taxpayers in the province. On average, it will have twice the benefit, so we'll reduce the taxes by $96 million over the next few years on property, which is good for every single property tax owner and payer in this province. And also a 25% tax break for new graduates to keep them here, to make sure that in their early years they make a commitment to Manitoba and they stay here to stake their future career.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Our third question on the economy is from Mr. Della Vincenza.
As you're all aware, the region has faced a lot of setbacks recently. The problems in agriculture are well documented. Recently you announced that the Germans are pulling out of Shiloh. Just the other day, we lost 70 jobs in the region with the closure of swans and the pullout of swans throughout Canada. And I guess given those setbacks, what specific plans do your parties have to deal with our economic situation right here in Western Manitoba and allow us to grow and prosper?
Thank you. Mr. Philman.
Well, Peter, that gives a very good example of how the economy keeps changing and that there is no such thing as the status quo. That in all the time that we're in office, there are constantly shifts and changes taking place, decisions being made every day. And we have to make ourselves as attractive as possible to people who are making decisions as to whether or not they're going to invest here and whether or not they're going to stake their future here. And that's why when we changed to dual marketing of hogs, which the NDP were adamantly opposed to and still are to this day, we opened up an opportunity for people to do hog processing here in this province. Schneider's moved in, invested $55 million, and of course Maple Leaf with $112 million and over 2,000 jobs ultimately. You've got to be prepared to look at what people want when they want to stake their future here. Tax reductions are absolutely essential. We're in competition with people right across this country, and people can choose to go wherever they want to take their knowledge and information, their entrepreneurial skills. That's why you have to be on top of these things and looking to the future, not to the past when you set out a plan for economic development. We have to be prepared to attract the value-added side of agriculture. We have to be prepared to continue to diversify agriculture, and the only way we're going to do that is if we have an environment that says to people, you can come here, you can make a reasonable profit, and you can keep a little bit at the end of the day so that you can raise your families too, so that this is a great place for you to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Dr. Gerard.
The southwestern Manitoba, farming and agriculture remains tremendously important. Liberals say to those in the farm community, we're going to fight for your interests and we'll do everything we can to enable you to stay on your farm as secure as you can be. So that when you're using good management practice, there'll be a future on your farm and in your community. I think that the base support for farming and for agriculture has got to be very, very strong, both in terms of safety net programs and at time of disasters. We need to build on that. And there's some very positive developments in the Brandon area in particular over the last number of years in terms of value-added developments. But we would need to go further. We need to make sure that we're really taking the optimum advantage, the tremendous advantage of what can happen. You know, the southwestern Manitoba, I'm told, has something like 1 million acres, which could be irrigated. And we need to have the foresight to do the watershed management and put in place the planning so that we can protect ourselves from disasters like this year, but also be there so that in dry years we have the irrigation infrastructure. We need to be thinking not only of the farm community, but in terms of what's happening in terms of technology. I announced earlier today we would provide support for the development of 20 technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship centers around the province to really build some of the new economy. We want to work with you in southwest Manitoba to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you. I think in this community we have to deal with the immediate challenge of the farm community. The Brandon Chamber of Commerce has done some excellent work on the impact of the crisis in this surrounding area. It's serious. And we have to get a short-term solution to the family farm situation in this region immediately. I know that you've got to work with the federal government. You've got to stand up for Manitoba producers by sitting down with the federal government. I'm committed to doing that. We also need a medium-term solution to the subsidy wars that we're losing with the American and European producers. We've got to have that. We've got to get some passion and emotion back on the loss of the family farm. Look at the kind of activity we saw just in the United States on the Farm Aid Concert. We need some of that here for the Saving the Family Farm. We need a transition strategy for the 70% of land in the next 15 years that will potentially go into larger and larger farms with fewer and fewer people shopping in Brandon, or have the ability of a family farm to be stabilized. This is crucial for this region, We have some long-term solutions, but we need some short-term support for the family farm in this region. And from day one, I want to work with the federal government and the farm community to get the same support in crisis that the family farmers got in the Red River Valley here in southwest Manitoba. It's not there yet, and it's got to be there after this election campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Doer. We will now go to closing and rebuttal statements on the economy, and the leaders will have 2 minutes each on this. 2 minutes. We're moving along in our time here. The first is Mr. Philman.
There's no question that a proper safety net program is one of the critical linchpins to the next little while for the farmers of southwestern Manitoba. ADA won't cut it, and that's a program that was designed exclusively by the federal government without consultation with any of the provinces, and we and every other province said it's a terrible program, and it's proving to be the case. Dr. Gerard, I would suggest that you go and talk to Mr. Van Cleef and tell him that he's got to come up with a short-term safety net program. You remove the crow rate, you remove the GRIP program. There is no safety net for the farmers, and they need our help today. They also need our help today in the southwest corner. We came to Brandon, we met with the Rural Recovery Coalition, and we said, we've got to do something about this crisis, and we put $50 an acre payment for unceded acreage on the table. The federal government to this day has not responded. And Dr. Gerard, you have a responsibility, because you say you have a good relationship with the federal government, you were a part of it, you have a responsibility to go to them and say, the farmers in southwest Manitoba need your help. The farmers across Manitoba need a better safety net, and I suggest to you that you ought to go and do that. With respect to the area of taxation, people are saying that we can't afford it. Well, we can't afford not to lower our taxes. Even Roy Romano next door understands that. Part of his current election campaign is a $200 million reduction in personal income tax rates. He looks around him like everybody else. He sees the competition that's there for investment, for young people staking their future there, for people wanting to pursue knowledge-based industries and all sorts of high-tech things, and they need to have a competitive tax environment. And he has said that I have to be a part of that solution, unlike Mr. Doer, who is saying, I'm going to close my eyes to all of this. There is no tax gap problem. All we're going to do is promise people that we're going to keep giving money to special interests, to health and education, and to other things. We need to close the tax gap, and we need to do it in a big hurry.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Dr. Gerard, you have 2 minutes.
Sure. Mr. Philman, I think it's rather interesting that you talk about safety nets, but it was your government and your minister, Glenn Finlay, who in the early 90s wrote and requested unilaterally that the GRIP program be canceled. And why wasn't it modified then so that we had a long-term program which might have helped us and which might have worked? GRIP may not have been the answer. ADA certainly is not the answer, and I'm convinced that what we need is something better for the future. I think it's interesting that you asked me to go to Ottawa. It shows the kind of poor relations which you seem to have developed with Ottawa. You need...
nice try.
You need me as an intermediary.
Nice try.
You know, as Premier, I believe that I could do a whole lot better in making sure we've got good, strong, cooperative relationships and some really workable long-term safety net programs. But when we're dealing with the economy and we're talking about tax cuts, you know, there's some realities we also need to face. And that is that under Mr. Philman, this province has the child poverty capital of Canada. This province has had the largest number of children in care of any province in Canada on a per capita basis. This province has had the lowest number, proportion of young people in their early 20s in post-secondary education. These are records that we must tackle, and that is why the first thing in the agenda is not diving forward with tax cuts, it's tackling some real problems and finding real solutions for those problems which we have in Manitoba.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Doer.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very disappointed that you would construct health and education versus a tax gap, and you've been in office for 11 and a half years, as putting money into special interests. I consider patients and young people not special interests, Mr. Philman, and that's where there's a real difference. Patients will come first under our plan, and we won't just treat them as something to deal with, a meeting on the lab at the last moment after these ATCO trailers have been in place for 7 years, we won't just treat this as an afterthought, Mr. Philman. We believe that there is a child poverty center, and we have to do something. The soup kitchen in this community, which I visited, has doubled the number of lunches it served in the last year. That's not right. And we have to do something about those people that are most unfortunate. But we have to ensure that we maintain health and education and make achievable tax reductions. Your own so-called tax commission says that a race with other provinces to the bottom is not a good idea. It's not good tax policy, Mr. Philman. Even your own advisory group says it's not a good idea to gamble away revenues for future in health and education. Yes, tax reductions, we all want them. Everyone here wants a tax reduction. But we can't do it at the expense of health and education, and we can't do it at the expense of other economic priorities. We must develop an R&D strategy. Why is the biotech industry going to Saskatoon? Why aren't we doing more here in Brandon with the opportunities that must exist? Why can't we do more for this community to continue to develop the new and creative ways of the future economy for this community? Why can't we have business and government and universities and community colleges and people working together to develop those great opportunities of the future? I don't want to come forward with a billion-dollar promise I can't keep. We want to come forward with commitments we will keep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. We now move into our third and last segment, leadership and vision. And our first question is from President Dangerfield.
For many years, the Brandon Chamber of Commerce has advocated the importance of the second city concept, based on our belief that a healthy competition between economic centers, such as we see between Calgary and Edmonton and Saskatoon and Regina, is beneficial to the overall strength of the province. How would your government promote and support the recognition of Brandon as a legitimate alternative to Winnipeg for business investment?
Laurie, I couldn't agree with you more. As long as I can recall, and back to the days when I was practicing as a consulting engineer in this city, people longed for the thought that they could be a legitimate alternative to Winnipeg for investment and job opportunities. And that's why we are making the kinds of commitments that we're making to ensure that, firstly, half of our revenues that we generate over the next 5 years will be committed to health and education, and the other half to tax cuts to make us an attractive environment. I believe that you have so many competitive advantages here. I was out there meeting with the Maple Leaf people. I was in Toronto when the decision was ultimately made, and I know that they looked at this city and they saw it as having significant competitive advantages. The city can continue to have that by taking agriculture as its mainstay and by becoming the center for value-added agriculture. You can do what you've done in pork. You can do it with the feather industry and the egg industry and other things where you take and add the value and use it for export commodities or for industrial use of those products. You can go in areas that are outside the marketing board so that you can add to your opportunities here to compete. I think that this can be and will be a center of dynamic activity for small business growing into manufacturing. Certainly your costs of operation are very reasonable here. Your location is an advantage here in servicing the western part of the province and the eastern part of Saskatchewan, as you pointed out with respect to the Regional Health Centre. All of these things can be to your advantage, and I believe that our policies of keeping taxes down and attracting investment are going to help you a great deal.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Next we have Dr. Gerard.
Thank you. I was talking last Friday about our plan for working with the mayor and other groups in the city of Winnipeg and a City Plan 2000 and a vision for the city of Winnipeg as part of Manitoba. And I believe it's very important for the provincial government to work closely with the city of Brandon to develop a similar sort of plan in conjunction with the city of Brandon, looking at the future, the opportunities not only in traditional areas, but the opportunity in future thinking areas. The opportunities when we look at the areas of rural infrastructure needs. When we compare ourselves to Saskatchewan, the proportion of communities with natural gas is much lower. The proportion of irrigation infrastructure in southwestern Manitoba compared to Saskatchewan is much lower. There are some basic things we need to do for the whole region. when we're looking at the future industries. We need to understand the connection between health and agriculture and look at where things are going in terms of the opportunities, which are major for higher value crops and food products with the health benefits that we can market worldwide. And the opportunities in technology. As the federal minister with science and technology at the forefront, I saw what was happening in other cities, and I want to work with you in the post-secondary education institutions in the community to try and develop a kind of future-thinking plan that would make Brandon a very important city, which it already is, but even more important in Manitoba. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you, Laurie. The last number of times I've met with the Chamber, they've suggested some very excellent ideas of how the provincial government could work on an ongoing basis to make sure that Brandon is being considered with every decision the government may be looking at, and that Brandon is always part of the options for the government of the day to consider as it proceeds. There's lots of natural advantages with Brandon, but the suggestion for the Chamber about this early alert system so that options that are there could be available for the economic development groups in Brandon to compete for, I think are excellent, and I'm committed to it. The tourism budget neglects this region. We won't do that in future. The farm transfer issue, again, it's an issue raised by the Chamber. How do we make this an issue where young people can stay on the family farm? This is a huge issue for economic strength of this community. Value added and R&D, I think, are crucial to look at some of the successes of other provinces like Saskatoon and how we can apply those in a more meaningful way in this province. And finally, we can't have second-class hospitals and in this community. We should have the same capital investment in this hospital, in this region, and we will under a new government, that any other hospital in Manitoba. This hospital has got to be strengthened, and the capital has to proceed. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. We will probably have time for one more question from the panel, and that is from Mr. Del Vincenzo.
I get the dubious honor of the last question. It's the credibility question. Mr. Filmon, your major policy plank is very much a high-spending initiative, something that you used to criticize the New Democrats for. Mr. Dewar, at another time, your platform would look very much like something that the Conservatives would have put out. Mr. Gerard, you can't even field a full slate of candidates. Given each of those credibility problems, why would Manitobans trust any of you to run the province in the future?
Well, we save the tough ones for the last. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you. If you look at our 95 platform, it was costed. I've always believed in Tommy Douglas's theory and Ed Schreier's theory that a promise made should be a promise kept. And Manitobans have been telling us for the last 4 or 5 years that they want us only to come forward with commitments we can keep. So I'm trying to do that in this campaign, and that's why we've had 5 commitments that are costed and we can keep, as opposed to some of the other billion-dollar proposals. I can't believe that we could suggest any alternatives for health and education beyond the $400 million surplus projected by the Tories in the budget 4 months ago. I mean, where did this $600 million come? It was just poof in an election campaign, it appears. Now, I hope we should plan on we obviously want to be optimistic. I mean, everyone wants to see positive revenues. And I believe Manitoba is a great place, and we may well see those positive revenues. But you don't give away a bonus to an employee 4 years from now before you get the revenues in. That's what Mr. Filmon's doing, and by doing so, he's risking health or education, or he's planning to sell hydro again without our permission.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Filmon.
In 1995, we said we would pass balanced budget legislation, and we did. We said we would keep the budget balanced from then on, and we have for 5 consecutive budgets. We said we would pay down the debt each and every year, and we have been doing exactly that. We said we would bring in standards and testing to our schools, and we've done exactly that. We took this year's budget that Mr. Dewar voted for, which was a 3-year projection, and we've made it a 5-year projection. And if he takes a look at the figures by any conservative economic forecaster, and just this week the Royal Bank came out with their forecast for the next 5-year period, exactly the period we're talking about. They say we have room within our fiscal framework to add $500 million of spending, which is exactly what we're doing, and we'll have an additional $700 million for tax cuts. That's their projection, not mine, a totally independent authority with one of the best economists in Canada. That's the answer to the credibility, and that's the answer to the lack of vision that Mr. Dewar and his party have. They won't look ahead and see and let you know how much money is going to be brought in the normal course of growth of our economy. They're afraid to tell you that under their administration the economy would go down and they might not have the money to spend on you.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Oh, I'm sorry, we are done. No, Dr. Gerard is on the last on the second question here.
Sure. Well, we don't claim to be perfect. We acknowledge we're in a rebuilding phase in the Liberal Party. But I would say to you that we have 50 excellent candidates, including Peter Logan, Lisa Roy, Bob Brigden, who are here with me tonight. I would say to you that I will put my 50 candidates and their experience up against the other 57. And I would say also that in order to be a majority government, all one needs, in fact, is 29 elected MLAs, so that I think that we can claim to have a very credible and a group of people with a tremendous expertise. And we're here as a party presenting a voice, presenting an alternative, presenting some very constructive programs, and I think in a very credible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. We're now moving on to the closing statements on the leadership and vision segment. Dr. Gerard, you're first.
Yes, let me just make a couple of comments first on Mr. Dewar and his 5-point program. I suggest that 5 points is not enough to run a province, and that the kind of depth that we've been providing and is needed to run this province is much more than that. I also want to talk for a moment about watershed management. We've had a tremendous disaster in southwestern Manitoba, and one of the things that we should be doing is planning very well, and this is a leadership issue for the future. I have talked consistently about the urgent need to look at areas like irrigation and drainage, to put in place the planning environment and structures so that in fact we can build a higher value agricultural economy, a more stable economy which is at less risk from farm perspective, both in dry years and in wet years. And I would put my vision and leadership and challenge Mr. Philman, because I was in the Red River Valley not very long ago, and Mr. Philman said he was going to work very urgently after the flood of '97 to put in place the dike structures that would protect communities. Well, there were 17 planned dike structures, and only one of those is partly completed. 2.5 years later, that's not good enough. I think what we need when we look at infrastructure management and flood and drainage and a lot of other areas, then we need some improvements, and that's an area which I'd like to emphasize. And from a Liberal perspective, we believe in some vision, in some leadership, and getting things done.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Dewar.
Well, thank you. Dr. Gerard talks about our commitments. Getting ready for a debate a couple days ago, I clicked on the website for Liberal policies, and I noticed it was under construction. So perhaps you should hold your advice for all the rest of us. Mr. Philman makes the point about the Royal Bank, but just as usual, he doesn't include all the information. First of all, the Royal Bank doesn't deal with a change in interest rates. I guess they wouldn't want to. And secondly, they have stated in the report, we have made no allowance for the possibilities that pressures for higher spending may be greater in areas under provincial jurisdiction, health and education, and areas of federal jurisdiction. In other words, here you go again. You only report half the facts about the Royal Bank report. And that's what I think is wrong in this province. We should only make promises we can keep. $650 million for health care in the last election, you broke that promise. You broke your word on MTS. I don't trust you on hydro. I don't trust you on many of these other promises. And we have to have a team of men and women that surrounds themselves with people that are going to go forward with energy, with enthusiasm, but surround themselves with honest people. Manitobans are hardworking, honest people, and you have failed the test.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Philman.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And certainly Mr. Dewar doesn't tell you the whole story either. He says that we made, absolutely. He says that we made a commitment to spend $650 million on healthcare capital in the last election campaign. In fact, the commitment was $678 million, but we're delivering $800 million of capital today. That's exactly what's under construction and development and completed. And Mr. Dewar, yes, absolutely, Mr. Dewar. Mr. Dewar makes 5 commitments to you and your family, and 2 of them are to do nothing. One is that he will not get rid of the balanced budget legislation, and 2 is he will not sell Manitoba Hydro. And then you look at the other ones, and he says, we'll make our communities safer. But he didn't come out with any proposals on community safety until this morning, and they were a rehash of everything that's already underway today. He says we'll renew hope for young people, and the only thing he talks about here is that he'll cut the tuition fees by 10%. He doesn't talk about creating jobs because he's come out with no plan for job creation throughout this entire election campaign. And the reason is that during the last time that he was in government, our youth unemployment rate was 3% above Canada's, and today it's 3% below Canada's. And he says we're going to end hallway medicine for $15 million when we're already spending $2.1 billion on health care.
We're closed this section now. We are done our question-answer section. We are now moving on to the closing statements, again in pre-selected order. The candidates have 3 minutes each, and Mr. Philman is first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for coming and joining in this Leaders Forum. In just a few months, we'll be on the eve of a new century. This New Year's Eve, the residents of Brandon and the Westman region will have more to celebrate than ever before. Although some are suffering because of terrible acts of nature, I think it's fair to say that Brandon and this region are more successful today than at any other point in their history. Last year, more than $158 million in building permits were issued in Brandon. Residential developments have jumped by at least 1/3. As the Business Matters Manitoba magazine put it, proposals for residential developments continue to crop up at a dizzying pace. Just days ago, an article in the Brandon Sun referred to all of the equipment that Brandon's Health Centre has acquired. New ultrasound equipment, a new mammogram machine, a new CT scanner, and a new fluoro machine, and soon an MRI machine. Dr. Derry Decter put it best. He said, when you're trying to recruit doctors and they hear that Brandon will have an MRI scanner, they're going to say, there's a hospital on the way up, not a hospital that's crashing. And it's not just the hospital that's on the way up. It's this city, it's this entire region. You have shown us what can be accomplished when you work together and when you have a plan. You've successfully hosted some of the best sporting events in Canada, the 1999 World Junior Hockey Championships, Olympic curling trials, and the very successful Canada Summer Games, to name a few. The volunteers who are the heart and soul of these events have inspired and challenged us to follow their example. We owe it to them to find a way to transform that spirit, energy, and enthusiasm into a great future. As a party, we're offering our plan for the next 5 years and for a better future. A plan that, with Jim McRae and Marty Snelling working alongside me, will ensure Brandon's future will be even better than its past. Here in Brandon, Jim and Marty have worked very hard to make your city a better place for families, for business, and for visitors, and they can and will do more. When you consider your choices for this election, I'd ask you to consider just 2 questions. 1, are Brandon and the Westman region and Manitoba better off today than they were 10 years ago? And 2, who has the best plan and team to ensure Brandon and this region will be better off in 5 years than they are today? You have an important choice to make in this election. You can choose politicians who offer criticism with no real solutions, or you can choose a team with a record of success and a 5-year plan that will cut taxes and offer real solutions. I'm asking you to support our team, and I'm asking you to support our plan to attract and keep our young people here in the Brandon and in the Westman region. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Philman. Dr. Gerard, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Reg. Manitoba needs a leader for the 21st century. Gary Doer and Gary Philman try to represent their party as best they can, but I suggest to you that they're not the leaders we need for the future. Gary Doer, with his labor background with the Manitoba Government Employees Union, was a leader for the 1980s. Gary Philman, with his engineering background, was a leader who tried to build a new economy in the 1990s. But he's failed to deliver on health care promises, and we're in trouble for a variety of reasons. We need a leader for the 21st century with a new vision and a new background to implement that vision. Let me offer you my background. I'm a doctor who has first-hand experience with the healthcare system and an understanding of how to make improvements. I have a degree in economics, and I understand what is required of a government to meet the demands of a changing economy. I served in the federal cabinet as Secretary of State for Science, Research, and Technology. I know how important it is to bring Manitoba into the digital age, and if we don't, we will continue to fall behind. Earlier today, I announced we'd open 20 technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship centers all over Manitoba because we recognize how important it is to bring Manitobans into the new economy and to provide opportunities for people all over Manitoba. We can offer, I suggest to you, the best approach to manage the healthcare system. We've got ideas for improving the education system in this province and making real investments in our youth. And we will, as Liberals, lead Manitoba's economy into the 21st century. A wise man, Václav Havel, wrote, "We must not be afraid of dreaming the seemingly impossible if we want the seemingly impossible to become a reality." We need a leadership for this province that will take the dreams of Manitobans and make them a reality. I've listened to Manitobans around the province during my time as leader, and I've heard a desire for change. Manitobans want a balanced approach to government. They're tired of the 20 years of polarization in this province by the NDP and the Tories. Rural versus urban, rich versus poor, north versus south. Manitoba wants a party that makes it promises it can keep, not a billion-dollar tax plan. Mr. Doer has talked about the 5-point plan. It's the opposite. It's short, it's ancient history. It's nothing really new. It's old ideas recycled. Liberals offer a balanced approach and a new vision. Liberals will present real solutions to the real problems affecting Brandon, this area in western Manitoba, and indeed all of our province. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Mr. Doer.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the chance of presenting our views here tonight. Dr. Gerard mentioned Václav Havel. And Václav Havel, in my view, talked about Manitobans' dreams and vision when he said that we're more than just taxpayers, we're citizens. We're citizens with duties and responsibilities and dreams, and we care about our fellow citizen. And we're different than the Tories and some of the Tories in Ontario who only care about tax reductions at the expense of or gambling against health care and education. I believe in a changing global economy, we have to have an education and training strategy. We can't be the lowest number of kids enrolled in post-secondary education and training and compete in a changing global economy. Mr. Philman's competition is lower wages, lower skills. Our future is higher skills, higher training, and higher hope for our young people. That's why we have a plan to double the community college spots. That's why we will meet with this community to look at the enrollment at Brandon University and work with everybody here to return the enrollment to its previous levels and then go forward after that. That's why we're going to look at apprenticeship programs of today and of tomorrow. We will implement the Roblin Report to double the community college spots using ACC as part of our vision of a changing global economy and the necessity to train and educate our young people. I also pledge to you that the ethical challenge government of the past will be replaced with a group of men and women, Scott and Drew and others, that will surround themselves with honest, hardworking, fair-minded people, just like the people we serve. We can't have a situation in Manitoba where we forget that in a democracy we should compete on the basis of ideas, we should compete on the basis of policies, we should compete on the basis of people, but we should always compete in an honest way. We see leadership as having honest people, and that's what I promise you into the next century. Thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you very, very much for the questions. I think we've only touched the surface of a lot of the concerns the public has, but thank you for your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dewar. We have now reached the end of our Leaders Forum here in Brandon. Thank you to all the leaders for coming here this evening. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to both here in the UCT Pavilion and at home. I would like to remind you that the election is in 1 week. Get out and vote, please. We also have 2 more forums happening here this week. The first tomorrow night is for the Brandon East candidates from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And the next is on Thursday for Brandon West, again from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. We will again have a panel for questions and a moderator, but questions from the audience are encouraged at those forums as well, so please come out and attend. Thank you again for coming tonight. Thank you to the Brandon Chamber of Commerce, the Brandon Sun, CKX Television, Sill & Company, Keystone Centre, Benmark Sound, and again to the leaders. Thank you. Good night.
Sill & Company is committed to simplifying your problems with good advice and timely service delivered in a personal manner. We're only as big as you need us to be. Sill & Company, outstanding solutions.
This live commercial-free broadcast of the 1999 Provincial Leaders Forum has been brought to you by Sill & Company, Chartered Accountants.